I am Lavinia Moore, 35 years old, a U.S. Navy intelligence officer. That morning, Maryland was bright under the May sun, yet my heart felt as heavy as the sky before a storm. My car rolled over the Severn River Bridge toward the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, the site of my younger brother Caleb's medal ceremony. The roadside trees swayed in the sea breeze as I took a deep breath, readying the polite smile I'd worn so many times before. For years, whenever Caleb had an event, I played the role of the supportive sister from the background, standing quietly in the back row, smiling and clapping, like a pleasant shadow everyone could forget. I parked in the guest lot, slipped on a cream trench coat to conceal the dress whites underneath, and walked to the security gate. A young corporal took my ID, glanced at his tablet, then frowned. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I don't see the name Lavinia Moore on Lieutenant Commander Caleb Moore's guest list." He angled the screen toward me. 3 names: Robert Moore, Linda Moore, Rebecca Moore, Caleb's wife. Not me. It was a clean, deliberate strike. No clerical error. Before I could react, a black SUV pulled up. Caleb stepped out in his immaculate white dress uniform, cap under his arm, his tanned face wearing that self-satisfied smile. His eyes landed instantly on me being held at the gate. Instead of confirming me to the guard, Caleb tilted his head toward Rebecca and said loud enough for both me and the corporal to hear, "Must be a paperwork mix-up. She should date a real officer, not spend all day in an office typing." The words dropped like cold stones into my chest. I caught the way my mother, Linda, avoided my eyes, pretending to adjust her pearl necklace. My father, Robert, a retired Navy captain, only frowned, not at Caleb's insult but at me, for making a scene in public. No one defended me. Not one look of sympathy. They simply turned their backs and walked through the gate, leaving me standing there like an unclaimed piece of luggage. The young corporal shifted uneasily. "Ma'am, I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to step aside." I nodded, keeping my back straight, my shoulders steady. I would not cry. Not here, not in front of them. The pain didn't vanish. It hardened like a block of cold steel, waiting for its moment to break free. I stood there on the academy's perfectly trimmed lawn, watching my family disappear into the crowd. A strange feeling rose in me, not despair but a razor-edged resolve. If they wanted to treat me as the nameless sister one more time, today would be the day they never forgot. By the gate, my expression stayed calm, but my mind buzzed with old memories, fragments I'd tried to bury. Since childhood, my family's world revolved around Caleb, the heir to my parents' faith in military tradition. My father, Robert Moore, had been a Navy captain, so every story in our home began and ended with the word service. Caleb had been called the future captain since grade school and treated like an officer in training. I was different. I wasn't built for their vision. I read more than I played sports, preferred tinkering with machines to learning how to row. At every family gathering, Caleb was the center. Everyone crowding to hear about his swim meets, marksmanship trophies, and youth naval club drills. I was usually assigned to the kitchen helping my mother plate the food. I remember the summer I turned 16. Caleb had just been accepted into a prestigious naval preparatory program. My father hosted a backyard party, inviting nearly all his old shipmates and the neighbors. All evening he kept his arm around Caleb's shoulder, laughing loudly, introducing him as the future of the United States Navy. At the same time, I had just won first place nationwide in a cybersecurity competition. I had spent months programming, writing algorithms, eating and sleeping with lines of code to perfect my project. The gold medal and certificate were still warm in my hands when I found my father, hoping for praise. "Dad, I held out the medal, my hands trembling. He glanced at it, nodded and said flatly, "That's nice. But Caleb needs to double his conditioning for training season. Can you help your mother get more barbecue ready?" That was it. The achievement I thought would make him proud was brushed aside like a tiny note in the back of the paper. I smiled, but inside, it felt like someone had snuffed out a spark. Years later, when I applied to the Navy's intelligence branch, I thought, this time he'd acknowledge me. But the day I brought home my acceptance, his reaction was only a sigh and a stern look. Intelligence is just a support unit. Moors aren't meant for the back office. My mother, Linda, was softer, but her words were still a velvet-covered blade. "That's a good choice. Less dangerous. Less dangerous." 2 words that sounded like praise but really boxed me into the image of someone who needed shielding, someone not strong enough to sail into open seas or set foot on the battlefield. I didn't argue. I understood that in their eyes, battles fought from behind a console, hours of tense focus before streams of data, would never compare to the sound of cannons or the crash of waves against a ship's hull. From then on, whenever I came home, I automatically withdrew into myself. When Caleb talked about his training or patrol missions, my father would chime in with technical details to make it sound even more heroic. I would just sit quietly, smile, and occasionally ask a question or two to appear engaged. No one ever asked me what my own workday was like. One Thanksgiving, Caleb had just returned from a deployment in the Pacific. That dinner turned into a military seminar, with Caleb as the keynote speaker. I sat across from him, cutting into my slice of pumpkin pie, listening to my brother describe the feeling of standing on the ship's deck at dawn, while my father looked at him as if gazing at a living medal. Suddenly, my mother turned to me, her expression half sympathetic, half curious. "Lavinia, anything new at the office? Printing more reports?" The question was gentle, but it landed like a hammer on my pride. I answered briefly, "There are a few things worth mentioning, Mom." But I knew they didn't truly want to hear it. They had already decided my job was nothing more than a stream of numbers and lifeless paperwork. Those memories swirled in my mind now as I still stood outside the ceremony gates. Every dismissive word, every belittling glance, was another coat of paint on the wall separating me from my family. And today, with them deliberately erasing my name from the list, I knew that wall had become a fortress. I took a deep breath. Caleb and my parents might think I was just the shadow of the family, but they had forgotten one thing. Shadows can move, and sometimes they can cover the light. From the outside, it would seem like I worked in some dusty office at the Pentagon. Arriving in the morning, leaving in the evening, typing and processing reports like an administrative clerk. My family believed that for years, and I let them. In truth, my workplace sat dozens of feet below ground, far from any sunlight. Those in the field called it the vault, a top-secret intelligence facility sealed off from all electronic signals. No windows. No wall clocks. Only the hum of the air filtration system and the steady drone of hundreds of servers running around the clock. The wall in front of me was a massive curved screen, displaying dozens of maps, satellite images, and data streams from across the globe. Every glowing dot, every line told a story, each one a potential threat. My job wasn't just mindless typing. It was playing a global chess game where the pieces were human lives. One Tuesday night, I remember clearly, we were monitoring a high-risk operation off the coast of the Gulf of Aden. An American cargo ship was being shadowed by an armed foreign group. On the deck were 18 sailors, and a few nautical miles away, a SEAL team was waiting for the green light to approach. "Lavinia, thermal imaging shows unusual movement on the starboard side," a colleague reported over my headset. I zoomed in on the satellite feed. In the dark, a small boat with no running lights drifted dangerously close to the cargo ship. On that small boat's deck, 7 bright spots, 7 rifles, were aimed straight at the Special Operations team before they could even make their approach. "Everyone hold position," I said into the secure comms channel, keeping my voice steady despite my pulse pounding. "This is an ambush. Fall back to Delta coordinates immediately." Seconds later, confirmation came through. "Copy, pulling back now." We had just prevented an attack that could have ended in mass casualties. Moments later, outer support forces captured the armed group, rescuing the hostages without losing a single life. As everyone in the room exhaled in relief, I closed the comms channel and stared at the screen as it shifted to standby mode. Out there, no one would ever know what had just happened. The next morning, the news would simply say, "Cargo ships safely escorted to port," with no mention of those tense seconds or the unseen hands that pulled each person back from the edge. That same day, my personal phone buzzed. A text from Caleb, in Florida on leave. "Guess you're busy, printing reports." I let out a quiet laugh. Not because it was funny, but because of the sheer gap between reality and what my brother imagined. In his mind, I was at a printer fixing a paper jam. In reality, I had just helped keep an entire SEAL team alive. Men Caleb had always idolized as the ultimate warriors. In moments like that, I found silence was the wisest choice. Saying anything wouldn't change their perception. And besides, my work demanded absolute discretion. Over the years, I had learned to keep my two worlds separate. On one side, the cold, windowless room where split-second decisions could change the course of a conflict. On the other, family dinners where the biggest question for me was, "So, are you planning to settle down?" I used to think I was fine with that. But standing at the academy gates this morning, watching my parents and Caleb walk in without so much as a glance back, I realized that silence was no longer a shield, it had become a chain. And this chain sooner or later I would break. Because in the shadows of the vault, I had learned how to control the board. And maybe it was time to apply that skill to a chess match called the Moore family. 2 days after the Gulf of Aden operation, I was summoned to Navy Command Headquarters in Arlington. The one who called me in was General Arthur Kane, a 4-star general known for being both stern and razor-sharp, and also my direct commanding officer. His office was on an upper floor with glass windows overlooking the Potomac River. When I walked in, he was standing by the window holding a cup of black coffee, his back as straight as a man who had just left the battlefield. "Have a seat, Lavinia." His voice was deep, but without the cold edge of a technical briefing. I sat down in the leather chair across from his desk. The scent of walnut wood and old paperwork created that familiar air of rooms where every word spoken could change a career. He set down his coffee, took his seat, and looked me straight in the eye. "You saved 18 sailors and an entire SEAL team. And you did it quietly, as always." I gave a faint smile. "That's my job, General." He nodded slowly as if weighing each word. "There's something I think it's time for. Do you remember Operation Ravenfall?" I froze for a moment. How could I forget? It was a campaign that lasted over 2 years, aimed at dismantling a terrorist financing network spanning 3 continents. We had tracked every transaction, every ship, every container, until the entire network collapsed. That achievement was sealed in classified files, with not a single line released to the public. "The Department of Defense just approved partial declassification," Kane continued. "And the Joint Chiefs have agreed to award you the Distinguished Service Medal. This is an honor few intelligence officers ever receive, especially at 35. I was silent for a few seconds. His words echoed in my mind like a distant bell. In my world, accolades weren't something you chased, but when they came, they carried the weight of an entire lifetime. General Kane leaned forward, the corner of his mouth curving into a rare smile. "The ceremony will be held next month. And I hear Lieutenant Commander Caleb Moore's award ceremony is set for the same time at the Naval Academy." I frowned. "Sir. Same location. Same day." "Well then," he said slowly, "it would be interesting if in the same event the nation honored both Moore siblings, each for different contributions to our country. And this time, every eye will see the full story." I understood exactly what he meant. This wasn't a simple suggestion. It was a strategy. He knew about the rift between me and my family, likely from colleagues or formal gatherings. And he understood that revealing the truth on that particular day would be the sharpest turn of the tide. I leaned back in my chair, thinking quietly. For years, I had chosen silence, letting my family keep the image of me they wanted. But deep down, there was still a small, very small, part of me that wanted them to know who I truly was. Not to boast, but to end that shadow once and for all. Kane didn't press me. He simply added, "Lavinia, sometimes silence is a weapon. But there are times when it needs to be replaced with truth. And I think the time has come." I lifted my gaze to meet his directly. "If I agree, I want control of the situation. No warning to them. No chance for them to prepare." "Exactly what I was thinking," Kane replied, his voice laced with satisfaction. When I left his office, the wind from the Potomac drifted down the hallway with a cool, damp scent. I walked slowly, picturing the moment. Caleb stepping onto the stage, accepting his medal, smiling with confidence, and minutes later my own name being called. But the image didn't bring me glee, it brought me calm. Like a chess match where I had foreseen a dozen moves ahead, and at last, it was my turn to make the decisive play. That evening, I returned to my small apartment in Alexandria, opened my safe, and took out the dress white uniform that had been meticulously cleaned and pressed. On the table, I placed the blue velvet box containing my rank insignia, letting my hand rest lightly on the cool metal. Just one more month. 1 month not to prepare a speech but to prepare for a single moment. A moment when every prejudice, every dismissive word, would crumble without me having to say a thing. I looked out the window at the city bathed in warm yellow light. Beyond lay the road to Annapolis. And I knew when that day came I would walk in not only as an intelligence officer, but as someone ready to let the truth speak for itself. That day finally arrived. Dawn in Annapolis gilded the waters of the Severn River, the first rays sparkling over the red brick buildings of the Naval Academy. I drove in wearing my familiar cream trench coat, underneath it the immaculate white dress uniform heavy with medals and rank insignia. I had prepared myself for the opening act. And just as I expected, when I reached the main gate, the gate sentry held the guest list, scanned it once, then looked up at me. "Sorry, ma'am. There's no Lavinia Moore on Lieutenant Commander Caleb Moore's guest list." I tilted my head toward the screen, clearly seeing 3 familiar names: Robert Moore, Linda Moore, Rebecca Moore. Not me. Before I could answer, the family's shiny black SUV pulled up. Caleb stepped out first in his brilliant white dress uniform, his stride full of confidence. His eyes landed on me, lips curling into a thin smile. He turned to his wife, speaking loudly enough for both me and the sentry to hear. "Maybe you should find yourself a man who knows how to sail instead of spending your whole life in an office." My mother pretended to busy herself adjusting her brooch. My father stared straight ahead as if I were a stranger. They swept past the gate, leaving me behind, just as in the script I knew by heart. "Ma'am, I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to step aside," the young sentry said, his tone awkward. I gave a small nod, keeping my back straight. Inside, my heartbeat stayed steady and cold, not a beat straying from the plan. Then came the low, steady hum of an engine from a distance. A black sedan flying the command's flag pulled up and stopped right at the gate. The door opened and General Arthur Kane stepped out. He wore his dress uniform with 4 gleaming stars on his shoulders, his gaze sweeping the scene in seconds. He looked at me and a rare warm smile appeared. His voice was deep but cut clean through the tense air. "There you are, Rear Admiral Moore. We were just about to send someone to find you." I saw the young sentry's eyes widen, realizing he had almost made a serious mistake. He snapped to attention and saluted. "Apologies, Rear Admiral. Please go right in." The gate swung open and General Kane lightly placed a hand on my elbow, guiding me forward. But before I moved on, I let my eyes sweep over the guest section inside. My father turned back, lips parting but no words coming out. My mother covered her mouth, eyes wide. Caleb stood frozen, the color drained from his face. I said nothing. No nod. No smile. I simply faced forward, walking with General Kane through the gate, letting them absorb the shock in their own way. We passed the VIP rows where high-ranking officers, politicians, and distinguished guests were already seated. I could feel their eyes following me, but my back stayed straight and my pace never faltered. General Kane spoke low, just for me to hear. "Today you're not just receiving a medal. Today you're reclaiming your rightful place." I answered quietly, "General, I'll do that," without a single argument. And I knew the hardest part wasn't walking through the gate. It was keeping silent at the right moment, letting every glance, every gesture from them become proof of a change that couldn't be undone. We stopped at the very first row of the VIP section, right beside the steps to the stage. As I sat down, I could feel a stare from behind, not contempt anymore but chaos. A mix of confusion, discomfort, and just a hint of fear. I smiled faintly without turning around. Exactly as planned, the game had begun. And this time I held the power pieces. The ceremony began with the brass band's notes echoing through the hall. On stage, the American flag waved, the light glinting off rows of white uniforms. I sat in the front row of the VIP section, back straight, eyes forward, yet still aware of the gazes behind me, gazes still reeling from the shock at the gate. The master of ceremonies, a colonel with a warm, resonant voice, stepped to the microphone. "And now, please welcome Lieutenant Commander Caleb Moore to receive the Navy Commendation Medal for outstanding contributions to safeguarding international shipping lanes." Caleb stood, walking to the stage with the practiced ease of someone born for the spotlight. He accepted the medal from the commanding officer, bowed just enough, then stepped to the microphone. His voice rang out clearly, adjusted so every ear could catch it. "First, I want to thank the United States Navy for giving me the opportunity to serve and grow. I'm grateful to those who guided me, and especially I want to thank my father, Captain Robert Moore, for teaching me the meaning of discipline, loyalty, and courage. Thank you to my mother, Linda Moore, who always prayed for me and watched over me whenever I shipped out. And finally, thank you to my wife, Rebecca, for being my steadfast support at home." He paused briefly, smiling, letting the applause swell. Not once did he mention me. Not one glance toward the row where I sat. I wasn't surprised. This was Caleb, always knowing exactly which words to choose to honor the ones he wanted, and erase the ones he didn't. When the applause died down, Caleb stepped off the stage, the spotlight still clinging to him. I saw my parents lean toward him, shaking hands, smiling in satisfaction. Then the MC was about to move on, but General Arthur Kane rose from the guest section and walked straight to the stage. The entire hall fell silent. No one expected a four-star general to step in unannounced. He stood at the microphone, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Today we've honored an outstanding officer at sea. But there are also heroes who work in the shadows, where there are no lights, where their success is measured by tragedies prevented, lives saved that no one ever hears about." A wave of murmurs rippled through the hall. I saw Caleb lean slightly toward our father, whispering something, his brows furrowed. General Kane continued, "Less than a year ago, a United States destroyer narrowly escaped a missile ambush in the Gulf of Aden. The swift actions of an intelligence unit saved the lives of the entire crew, including one officer you have just honored today." I saw Caleb's eyes widen, then freeze as if realizing the story was taking an unexpected turn. "The commander of that unit," General Kane emphasized, "is the youngest officer in modern U.S. Navy history to be promoted to Rear Admiral. Today we officially declassify Operation Ravenfall and honor the one who led it, someone whose greatest achievements have been carried out in silence." He turned his head, his gaze landing on me, his voice dropping lower. "Rear Admiral Lavinia Moore, please come forward." A moment of absolute stillness. Then every officer in the hall, from the young ensigns in the back rows to the silver-haired admirals in the front, rose to their feet, turning toward me and saluting. The sound of chairs shifting filled the room like a wave, except for three that remained still: my father's, my mother's, and Caleb's. They sat frozen as if all strength had been drained from them. I rose, walking slowly toward the stage. The lights from above reflected off my white dress uniform, making the two silver stars on my shoulders shine brilliantly. I didn't look toward their row, but I knew their eyes were fixed on my every move, for the first time not to judge, but to try to understand a person they had never bothered to know. When I reached the final step, General Kane handed me the velvet box containing the Distinguished Service Medal. He pinned it to my chest, then murmured just for me, "This is the day your story is told, Lavinia." I turned to face the hall, where everyone was still standing at attention. The applause thundered, wave after wave crashing like the ocean against a rocky shore. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about revenge or satisfaction, only a profound sense of peace, as if the darkness had finally given way to light. The ceremony ended with the blare of the brass and a long line of handshakes. I was speaking with several members of the House Armed Services Committee when I caught General Kane's gaze from across the room. He gave a slight nod, then discreetly signaled toward the hallway behind the auditorium. When I stepped out, a young officer, his aide, was waiting. "Rear Admiral, there's someone who'd like to meet with you privately," he said quietly. I knew immediately who it was. The small meeting room at the end of the hall was so quiet I could hear my heels click against the wood floor. When I entered, Caleb was leaning on the table, his face tense. My father sat against the wall, eyes downcast, while my mother stood by the window, her hands clasped together. Caleb spoke first, his voice so sharp it nearly broke into a shout. "What do you think you just did? You turned this whole family into a joke. That entire hall. You let them believe you're the hero and I'm just the supporting act." I pulled out a chair and sat calm. "No, Caleb. I let the truth speak for itself." He gave a short, bitter laugh, but his eyes couldn't hide the hurt. "You sit in an air-conditioned room typing on a keyboard, and you get a medal most combat officers will never see in their lifetime. Do you have any idea how insulting that is?" I leaned forward, meeting his gaze. "What's insulting, Caleb, is that in all these years, not once have you or our parents asked what I actually do. Not once has anyone asked if I'm happy in my work. You decided it didn't matter, because it wasn't the kind of thing you were used to honoring." My mother turned slightly, her voice trembling. "Sweetheart, I just wanted you safe. We didn't want to lose you out at sea. I shook my head, cutting her off. No, Mom. You wanted me safe and also to fit the mold you created. And Dad, I turned toward the man who'd been silent all this time, you wanted every child to serve in the way you considered honorable. I was never part of that picture, so you left me out. My father slowly lifted his gaze. For the first time in years, it wasn't cold, it was tired. Maybe I was wrong. The words made the room fall utterly silent. Caleb turned to him as if he couldn't believe what he'd heard. I said nothing, letting the quiet stretch, forcing them all to sit with what had just been admitted. Finally, I stood, looking at all three of them. I'm going to make this clear once. If we're going to have any kind of family relationship, it has to start with real respect. No more jabs, no more comparisons, no more belittling. If not, then it's better we keep our distance. Caleb pressed his lips together but didn't argue. My mother looked down, her shoulders trembling slightly. My father leaned back in his chair, exhaling as if setting down an old, heavy burden. The secure phone in my pocket buzzed, the alert tone that only came with urgent orders from command. I glanced at the screen, then turned back to them. I have to go. This can't wait. I stepped to the door, then stopped, my back to them. I'm still the daughter and sister in this family. But I will never again accept being treated as someone on the sidelines. If you want to be in my life, remember that. No one replied. I opened the door, leaving behind a room heavy with silence, where the truth had just torn through a shell that had lasted for years. 6 months passed since the ceremony in Annapolis. That time felt to me like a long voyage across calm seas. No big waves, but plenty of deep currents underneath. One Sunday afternoon, I got a text from my mother. Come home for dinner. Your father has something he wants to show you. I couldn't guess what it was, but I agreed. When I walked into the living room, the first thing I saw was the family's medal display case. The one that, all through my childhood, held only my father's achievements and later Caleb's. Now, right in the center at eye level was my Distinguished Service Medal. Next to it, a large framed photo. Me on stage receiving the medal from General Kane. Sunlight from the window made the glass shine brilliantly. My father stood beside it, cloth in hand, brushing away an imaginary speck of dust. He didn't look at me right away, just said, "It's time." This case told the full story of the Moore family, not just half of it. I was silent for a few seconds. It wasn't a direct apology, but it was enough for me to know he had truly changed his view. Dinner that night was different too. No more one-sided stories glorifying Caleb's assignments. Instead, my father asked me about the challenges of personnel management at the Pentagon. My mother was curious about coordination between branches. They listened, really listened, instead of waiting for their turn to speak. Caleb was quieter than usual. But as I was cutting my meat, he spoke up. On my ship, I just implemented a new risk assessment system. Some of the principles sound familiar. Feels like I learned them from someone. I looked up, meeting his eyes. This time there was no challenge, just a shy, awkward smile. After dinner, as we all sat on the back porch, Caleb suddenly said, I'm sorry for everything I said and did. Back then, I always felt I had to keep up the image of Dad's successor. Seeing you choose a different path, I was afraid. Afraid you'd prove there are many ways to be a great officer. And that made me uneasy. The admission wasn't dramatic, no tears, but it was honest. I sat quietly for a moment, hearing the wind pass through the trees. Caleb, I've learned over time that my worth doesn't depend on whether others acknowledge it. But I won't deny, having my family finally see me is a gift. He nodded, eyes drifting toward the distance. I'm proud you're my sister. I smiled, not the smile of victory, but of someone returning to harbor after a long journey, carrying the salt of past storms, yet also the light of a new dawn. That night, after leaving my parents' house, I drove along the road by the Potomac. The city stretched ahead, its lights reflecting off the water in shimmering gold ribbons. I slowed, rolled down the window, letting the night air in. In that moment, I realized I no longer carried the heaviness that used to cling to me every time I left their home. Instead, there was lightness, and a peace I'd taken years to find again. For so long, I thought my family's recognition was the final destination, that only when they acknowledged me would I be enough in their eyes. But after it all, after they saw me in a position they once thought impossible, I understood. My true worth had never been in their hands. I once stayed silent because I believed my words had no value. But the silence at that medal ceremony meant something entirely different. It wasn't submission, it was strategy. I didn't need to shout to prove myself. I only needed to walk forward and let the truth reveal itself. Respect, I realized, can't exist if it only comes from one side. I'd learned I had to set boundaries to make others see me for who I am. No one can give you self-respect and no one has the right to take it away. Caleb apologized. My father changed the way the medals were displayed. My mother began asking about my work without trying to shift the topic to marriage. But even if none of that had happened, I would still live and serve as I have. Because I know exactly who I am. I am Rear Admiral Lavinia Moore. I am the one who commanded operations no one will ever know by name, stopped crises that will never be reported in the news, and protected lives that will never know I existed. And above all, I am someone who doesn't need anyone's permission to exist fully. When I parked at a lot near the riverbank, I looked down at the flowing water. In the gentle sound of the waves, I felt a reminder. Sometimes not every battle needs swords or guns. Some battles only require you to stand firm, stay resolute, and let the truth speak for itself. I smiled to myself. My journey wasn't over. But this time I carried no expectation of being recognized by anyone. I carried only myself, and that was enough. If my story can say anything to anyone listening, it's this. True worth is not defined by others. Respect and recognition only have meaning when they come from both sides. And sometimes the strongest answer is to stay silent, walk forward, and let the truth shine in the light. Lavinia's story is a reminder that in real life, a person's value doesn't come from the spotlight others grant them, but from staying true to the path they choose. Respect is only lasting when it comes from both sides, and sometimes, silence is the most powerful response. Like Lavinia, we don't need noise to prove ourselves. We just need to keep working and let results and truth speak for themselves. Because in the end, what matters most is knowing exactly who you are and living true to it. What do you think about Lavinia's journey and the changes in her family? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel to catch more captivating stories about family life and relationships.